This illustration was presented to NTEA participants at the Work Truck Show. It is also part of Z-Factor Consultation's on-site classroom training. The instructor/owners have a combined 60+ years of experience in most aspects of heavy-duty vehicle specification. They are available for individual assistance on a case-by-case basis. Now, weight distribution. Every item has one vertical center of gravity. When that item is supported by 2 points on the ground, the location of that center of gravity will determine how much of its weight is placed on each support. For trucks, the axles are the supports. In terms of vehicle wheelbase, we will solve for the first support. The balance of the load will be supported by the front axle, the second support. The first support is the center line of the rear axle group, no matter how many axles it encompasses. Locating the cargo so that axle loads can be maximized is key to customer profit. If the pusher axle, rear axles and strong arm tag are maxed in capacity, then the front axle must be loaded to 20,000 pounds, or less material can be carried. To calculate how weight is split, a unit of measurement is required. After this, the split is simply a percentage between each of the supports. In this example, 1,000 pounds located at 80% of the wheelbase places 800 pounds on the rear axles. The total item weight minus the 800 transferred to the rear, leaves 200 pounds added to the front axle ground load. This means that whatever the curb weight on this axle is when the vehicle is unloaded, adding the load increases it by 200 pounds. Our formula is listed here. Keep in mind that we are always solving for the first support, the rear axle position, and then subtracting the number from total item weight to arrive at the second support impact. In most cases you will need to calculate the A dimension. Add together the front axle to back of cab dimension and the location from cab to the CG of the item. Make certain that if there is a gap between the item and the cab, you are accounting for it. When dividing the A dimension by the wheelbase, we find that 74% of the payload, or 25,200 pounds, is supported by the rear axles with the balance, or 8,800 pounds, added to the front axle. With our weights, added to the unloaded curb weights of the bare chassis, we see how the vehicle will be loaded while operating. This would be compared against the component capacities. Not too bad, if that front axle is rated for 20,000 pounds. Because some items are positioned relative to one another, we can combine the group into a single CG to simplify the math. This would be common with a mixer where all components are on a subframe, or for a service truck body. We will multiply each item's weight and location, then add them all together. We take that result and divide it by the total weight to arrive at one A dimension for the group of items. Here's an observation. If the A dimension is equal to the wheelbase, it means that 100% of the load will be placed on the rear axle group. This means that none of the weight is added to the front axle. Clever, huh? Let's use some numbers so that you can familiarize yourself with the math. Calculate the result above to arrive at the CG of this load. Remember, it is the combined total weight that we are solving for. You should have arrived at a CG, or a dimension, of 200.6 inches. This is the single CG of the 48,000 pounds. Since you have only one set of numbers, your weight split is much easier to arrive at. Recall the equation. You are looking for the percent of 48,000 pounds that will be placed on the rear axles when the group CG is 200.6 inches behind the front axle. Did your results look like the example? Good. Let's now look at a more complex, but very practical application. This weight distribution study is designed around a building material company. They deliver product to the building site, an application encompassing 3 differing scenarios. This is a very common study that needs close attention. This analysis will begin with the components that make up the first trip to the job site. These include the truck body, the 7 pallets, and a Moffett, used for unloading product at locations away from the warehouse. These are the tare weights of the chassis as it rolled off the assembly line. Using round numbers, to simplify our instruction, the front axle weighs 10,500 pounds while the tandems weigh 7,500 pounds. Note that the door label displays the component capability. This merely means that the front axle is approved for a capacity up to 14,600 pounds, and the tandems have a rating of 40,000 pounds. No legal road limits are applied here. Here we calculate the A dimension. It is important to know the front axle to back of cab length, as it detracts from the usable wheelbase. In the case of the bed, there is a 2-inch gap behind the cab. Notice the CG of the bed is not in the middle. We find the A dimension to be at 214 inches. This means that the entire bed weight of 6,000 pounds is concentrated at this point on the chassis. Next, we will analyze the cargo. The customer hauls pallets that are 48 inches square. We see this oftentimes with building or landscape materials. The size of the pallets permits the placement of 2, side by side, in rows. Recall how to calculate the A dimension. This formula is listed here. After that we just add 48 inches, the pallet size, to each row to arrive at the CG for each. In this case, the pallet CG is in the middle of the item. After performing the math for each row, we then add them all together using the multiple load point analysis. The goal is to arrive at one A dimension for the entire load. If this is unclear, return to slide 12 in this presentation. The entire load of 7 pallets is equal to 21,000 pounds concentrated 164 inches behind the front axle. Lastly, we will look at the Moffett. To find this A dimension you will need to know the CG of this piece of equipment. Loader-style machinery is weight-biased, so do not assume the CG is in the center. The result is 6,000 pounds, far beyond the 255-inch wheelbase. We can now use these numbers to arrive at solid estimates for how the vehicle will be loaded throughout the day. The morning run includes 7 pallets on the truck in the Moffett, as the material is transported to the job site. We will once again employ the multiple load point equation, using the 3 single point dimensions from the previous slide. And here we have it. The bed, the 7 pallets and the Moffett are represented by a single load point of 33,000 pounds positioned 219 inches behind the front axle. With one set of numbers we can get our weight split. This is where we apply our formula. The rear axle impact is equal to the A dimension divided by the wheelbase, or 86%, of 33,000 pounds. In this instance, 28,380 pounds are added to the rear with the balance added to the front axle. Note the weight. Part of the day the driver will move 10 pallets, without the Moffett, to the job site. In this case you once again use the multiple load point analysis from slide 12, you just have more items. In this case 78% of the cargo, or 23,400 pounds represents the additional weight on the rear axles. This leaves 6,600 pounds for the front axle to carry. Now we can look at how this weight split will impact the chassis. Notice that the front axle load is now anticipated to be 18,065 pounds. We were at 15,120 pounds with our Moffett run. Things are getting worse. This configuration represents the driver hauling the Moffett back to the warehouse once the delivery is complete. The math indicates that the Moffett adds 160% to the rear axles, or 9,741 pounds. The Moffett only weighs 6,000 pounds. Where does the additional weight come from? It's a lever, or teeter-totter effect. The Moffett effectively unloads the front axle by the difference between what is added to the rear axles and what the Moffett actually weighs. To preserve steering, we cannot unload the front axle too much. At a minimum, we need 50% of the curb, or tare, weight. In this case the number is 5,250 pounds and we are well above that. Now that you've worked through a few situations, can you discern how to keep more weight on the front axle? Moving the end of frame load closer to the rear axles, or extending it further back? Very good. Positions closer to the rear axles will shorten the lever and remove less weight from the front axle. These are the actual axle loads, including the bed, when carrying only the Moffett. Lift axles are used to redistribute the weight when the load is too heavy for the front and or rear axle capacities. They push up on the frame in an inverse of how the cargo pushes down on the frame. This formula should look familiar by now, only it's under the vehicle, as opposed to above. Additionally, the A dimension has been replaced by the C dimension, simply to avoid confusion. You're not confused, are you? The formula is the same. Again, we solve for the rear axle impact, and the balance is the front axle impact. You will most likely need to calculate the C dimension. If you can arrive at the pusher location, here represented as the letter D, then you can subtract D from wheelbase to arrive at the C dimension. Since our rear axles are all spaced 54 inches apart, it's simply half of 54, or 27 plus 54 inches, for 81 total inches, representing the distance from the end of wheelbase to the pusher axle position. Subtract this from the wheelbase to arrive at C. We can now divide C by the wheelbase, resulting in 64% of the assistance the pusher supplies, aiding the rear axle. This means that a 13,200 pound rated pusher, capable of supplying 12,000 pounds of aid, relieves the axles by the amounts displayed. Please note, no lift axle can supplement a vehicle to its rated capacity. You always have to subtract the weight of the lift axle from the capacity to arrive at the value for maximum chassis assistance. Recall that this was our customer's worst case. We are looking to relieve some weight from all axles to get to 14,600 pounds, rated capacity, on the front and 34,000 pounds, bridge law maximum, on the rear. We will add a pusher rated at 13,500 pounds. It weighs 1,500 pounds, so the balance is the assistance we can supply to redistribute the axle loads. Our lift axle is 174 inches behind the front axle. If you don't understand this math, refer to slides 51 and 52. The pusher is capable of taking 68% of the 12,000 pounds assistance off the rear axles, with the balance coming off the front. If we apply these numbers to the loaded truck, we see how the front axle will now carry 14,225, the pusher axle will have a ground load of 13,500, and the rear axle scale at 27,775 pounds. This is perfect. Feel free to call us with questions, or to schedule an on-site class. Visit our website for calculators that perform these functions, or to get our contact info. Congratulations, you made it. Thank you for taking the time to understand this concept. Your customers will appreciate it. And you.